So today I'm going to talk a little about the Transborder Immigrant Tool and its relation to language, landscape, and resistance. Our guiding question is how is resistance performed through language in the Transborder Immigrant Tool? So if we go back to the values of its creators, we get the words cyber activism and performance art, but it's not necessarily I guess what you first think of when referring to the Transborder Immigrant Tool, because two pretty prominent dictionaries give us. If we look up the word activism, we see resistance through activism is often perceived as a very visual entity, very like self-asserting in your face. So um, the TBT doesn't use language in the way that we usually see with acts of resistance. It does it in a very subtle way, changing how we perceive the outside world in ways that we normally don't question. Um, so um, Getting into like how we perceive or just I guess regard things overall, whether they're tangible or not, is oftentimes entangled and how they are described through language. So the CBT performance resistance, by the way, it transforms the physical and digital, but mostly physical landscape of the desert. Pictured is the Sonoran Desert, which mainly straddles the Arizona U.S. Mexico border, and this one in particular because it's the also the focus of Jason De Leon's book, The Land of Open Graves, Living and Dying on the Migrant Trail, in which he lays some theoretical framework about this particular landscape. So one of the policies that talks about is prevention through deterrence, which was one of the was like a set of policies enacted in the 1990s by the U.S. government to curb unwanted immigration, mainly from Mexico, Central America, and through this redirect the crossing routes through the Sonoran Desert. And then on the right is just a little one opening passages from his book in which he kind of talks about or like the juxtaposes like the beauty of the desert, but how unforgiving it can be. So essentially, there's the U.S. government has put forth this language in that kind of siphons individuals seeking to cross like this harsh terrain. Um, they've kind of created this state of exception, which De Leon talks about, which basically allows for the death of like I guess it's commonly referred to as illegals, but these undocumented migrants to be disregarded. So the government has been able to allow public perception to buy into this extremely violent, like anti-immigrant discourse. And because the desert is so sparsely populated and largely outside of America's public eyes, it can be policed in violent ways that wouldn't affect most people, and people being U.S. citizens, because it's quote um, outside of civilization, which De Leon talks about in his prevention through deterrence chapter. And then so with this conversion, the border patrol and other U.S. government officials um, are able to kind of like turn around and use toned down discourse with shifting the blame of immigrant deaths to natural processes, which isn't the case. So how the Sonora Desert is perceived by U.S. citizens is largely enforced by utterances from the U.S. government, who have essentially turned the desert into a killing machine. So the question is, can poetry reverse this effect and bring um, these socio and political issues to light? And my stance is that because the TBT aids in the survival of people in the harsh landscape, informally through poetry, that this challenges the rhetoric from the U.S. government that migrants are dying due to natural causes. Offering these survival strategies poetically takes away from some of the agency from the U.S. government as well as the desert. And I mentioned the word agency because De Leon argues in his book that no one thing can be like wholly responsible for one act of agency. So these survival strategies just take a little bit, they put a little bit of responsibility and accountability back on the U.S. government officials for the deaths of people in the desert. But in terms of poetry, if language in the TBT that describes the beauty and the diversity of the desert, uh, as well as its functionality and practicality, can if that language can turn discourse away from the desert being a killing machine and refocus that attention on its beauty as well as the social and political neglect for the lives of undocumented people, then I argue that that's indicative of an effective way to resist I guess the hegemony, all that good stuff.